Here's a story based on the title you provided. Mark had always been a fighter, a decorated war veteran. He had returned home after years of service, carrying not just medals but scars, some visible, some buried deep within. He had fought for his country, his family, and for the promise of a peaceful life with his wife, Emily, who had been his anchor through the storms of war. Life back home was different than he imagined. The bustling, patriotic parades that welcomed him home soon faded into quiet nights where Emily would sit on her phone, engrossed in conversations Mark wasn't a part of. He tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to her adapting to their new routine. But as weeks turned into months, a gnawing unease grew inside him. Emily had always been loving and supportive during his deployments, sending care packages and writing letters that kept him tethered to hope. But now, her warmth seemed distant. She often made excuses to stay out late, citing work or errands, and her once effusive affection had cooled to an indifferent murmur. Mark's gut told him something was wrong, but he hesitated to confront her. The battlefield had taught him patience, and he hoped that whatever was pulling them apart could be fixed with time. He spent his days trying to readjust to civilian life, attending therapy sessions for his PTSD, and tinkering with the old car he'd always wanted to restore. One evening, Mark's unease turned to certainty. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications. He glanced at the screen and saw a string of messages from a name he didn't recognize. Hesitant but driven by the need to know, he unlocked her phone, something he'd never done before. What he saw shattered him. The texts weren't just casual or friendly. They were intimate, filled with confessions of love and plans for secret meetings. Emily had been seeing someone else, a man named Ryan, who had none of Mark's scars, none of his burdens. Ryan was her escape, her respite from the life she had shared with a man who had given everything to protect their freedom. Mark confronted Emily that night. His voice was calm, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. She broke down, admitting the affair, her words tumbling out in a mix of guilt and frustration. She claimed she had felt neglected, that Mark's trauma had built walls she couldn't climb. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow against the magnitude of her betrayal. For Mark, the betrayal cut deeper than any wound he'd suffered in combat. He had fought for her, for their future, only to come home and find that the battle he couldn't win was the one in his own home. He packed a bag and left that night, seeking solace in the silence of the road. The next chapter of Mark's life was one of rebuilding. He moved to a small town where he found peace in simple routines and a community that valued his service. It wasn't easy, but he learned to forgive, not for Emily's sake, but for his own. And while the scars of her betrayal remained, they became a reminder of his strength, his resilience, and his capacity to move forward, even when the world seemed to fall apart. Let me know if you like adjustments or expansions to the story. Mark's new life wasn't without its challenges, but it was also filled with unexpected opportunities. In the small town he now called home, he found a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The local community center was always looking for volunteers, and Mark decided to get involved. He began mentoring troubled teens, many of whom were struggling with challenges of their own, broken homes, addiction, or just the weight of feeling unseen. He didn't share his story with them at first, but his presence alone was enough. Mark's quiet strength and unwavering patience spoke louder than words. Over time, he found himself opening up, sharing bits and pieces of his past. His tales of perseverance and survival resonated with the kids, and he became a role model they could look up to. Meanwhile, Emily's world was unraveling. Her relationship with Ryan, built on stolen moments and fleeting passion, quickly began to crumble under the weight of reality. The fantasy of escape that had drawn her to him faded as she realized that Ryan didn't know her the way Mark did. He didn't understand her fears, her insecurities, or the sacrifices she made alongside Mark during his time in the military. She reached out to Mark several months later, hoping for a chance to explain herself, to perhaps mend what had been broken. But when she called, his voice was steady, kind but distant. "Emily," he said, "I've made peace with what happened. I hope you can too. But I've moved on. And he had. In the small town, Mark had met someone who reminded him that love could be healing, not just a battlefield. Her name was Claire, a nurse at the local clinic who had an easy smile and a way of making even the darkest days feel brighter. She didn't try to fix Mark or push him to talk about his past, but she was there when he needed her, offering quiet support and a genuine kindness that reignited a part of him he thought was lost. Their relationship grew slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. Claire understood that Mark's journey to healing was his own, and she was content to walk alongside him rather than rush ahead. For the first time in years, Mark felt what it was like to be truly seen and valued, not for his service, not for his sacrifices, but simply for who he was. Emily eventually let go of her hopes for reconciliation, realizing that Mark's forgiveness didn't mean a return to the life they once shared. It was a lesson she carried with her as she tried to rebuild her own life, learning to face her choices and their consequences with honesty. Mark's story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about resilience, the power of community, and the healing that comes from letting go of the past. He continued to mentor at the community center, his life now a testament to the idea that even when everything seems lost, it's possible to find new beginnings. With Claire by his side, Mark found not just peace but a renewed sense of purpose, a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future he could finally look forward to. Mark and Claire's lives continued to intertwine with the community, creating a ripple effect of healing and connection. The Festival of Renewal became an annual tradition, drawing people from nearby towns to celebrate resilience and hope. Each year, new stories were shared. Stories of overcoming adversity, mending broken relationships, and finding strength in unity. One particular year, a surprising guest arrived at the festival, Emily. It had been years since Mark had last seen her, and her appearance stirred a mixture of emotions. She looked different, not just older but quieter, as if the weight of her past choices had reshaped her. She approached him cautiously, unsure if she was welcome. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I don't have the right to be here, but I wanted to see what you've built. It's incredible, and I wanted to thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it. It's taken me a long time to understand what I lost." Mark listened, his expression kind but guarded. Time had dulled the sharp edges of his pain, and he felt no anger, only a distant ache for what had been. "Emily," he said, "the past is the past. We've both moved on, and that's okay. I hope you've found your peace." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "I'm trying," she admitted. "I've started volunteering at a shelter in the city. It's not much, but it helps." Mark gave her a small, genuine smile. "That's good. Helping others. It's one of the best ways to heal." Their conversation was brief, but it left Emily with a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Watching Mark surrounded by love, purpose, and a community that cherished him, she saw the man she had once loved become more than she had ever imagined. And though she couldn't be part of his future, she felt gratitude for the role he had played in hers. As the festival wound down, Claire joined Mark by the bonfire, where music and laughter filled the air. She slipped her hand into his, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, sensing the remnants of his conversation with Emily. Mark nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "I am. It feels like a chapter is finally closed." Claire smiled softly. "Good. You deserve that." In the months that followed, Mark's work with veterans expanded. He collaborated with national organizations to create mentorship programs, using his small-town success as a model. Claire's mental health initiative grew as well, earning recognition for its innovative approach to community care. Their love deepened through the years, rooted in mutual respect and the quiet understanding that life's scars were not something to hide but to honor. They became a symbol of hope for many, a reminder that even the hardest battles could lead to something beautiful. Years later, as Mark sat on the porch of their home, now surrounded by a lush garden they had cultivated together, he reflected on his journey. Life had taken unexpected turns, some painful, others joyful, but each one had shaped him into the man he had become. Beside him, Claire reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining like the roots of the trees around them, strong, steady, unbreakable. In that moment, Mark realized that while life hadn't given him the future he once envisioned, it had given him something better. A second chance, a love that healed, and a purpose that endured. And for that, he was profoundly grateful that as the years rolled by, Mark and Claire became pillars of their community, not just through their work, but through the quiet wisdom they imparted to those around them. Their home, a modest yet warm house on the edge of town, became a gathering place for friends, neighbors, and anyone seeking comfort or advice. The porch light was always on, a beacon for anyone who needed it. One crisp autumn evening, Mark received a call that would again shift the course of his life. It was Jonah, the boy he had mentored years ago at the community center. Now a young man in college, Jonah spoke with a confidence Mark hardly recognized, but was proud to hear. "Mark," Jonah said, his voice filled with excitement, "I've been accepted into the graduate program for social work, and it's because of you. You showed me how to take pain and turn it into something meaningful. I want to do the same for others." Mark was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the impact of his journey. "Jonah," he finally replied, his voice thick with emotion, "you've done the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction. I'm proud of you. So proud." The call left Mark reflecting on the countless lives he had touched, not just Jonah's, but the many veterans, teens, and families he had supported over the years. He realized that every step of his journey, from the battlefield to betrayal, heartbreak to healing, had led him to this point. His pain had carved a path for others to follow, and that was a legacy he hadn't anticipated but deeply cherished. Claire found him sitting quietly in the garden later that evening, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Just thinking about how far we've come," Mark said, his eyes glinting in the soft light of the moon. "I never imagined this life when I first came back home. I thought everything was over. But now, it feels like it was only the beginning." Claire smiled, her hand resting gently on his arm. "It's because you didn't give up. You let life surprise you." Not long after, Claire suggested they write a book together. "Your story, our story. It could inspire so many more people than we've reached here," she said. At first, Mark hesitated. He wasn't sure if revisiting the darker parts of his life was something he wanted to do. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how many people might need to hear it. The book, From Scars to Strength, became a labor of love. It chronicled Mark's journey from the battlefield to betrayal, from despair to hope, and the powerful role love and community played in his healing. Claire contributed her perspective as well, detailing how their shared efforts in the town brought purpose and connection to so many lives. When the book was published, it resonated far and wide, drawing attention to the programs they had started in their small town. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand their initiatives. The community center became a hub of resources, offering everything from counseling to job training for veterans and troubled youth. As they celebrated the success of the book and the growing impact of their work, Mark and Claire remained grounded in the simple joys of their life together. They hosted family-style dinners, tended their garden, and spent quiet evenings by the fire. Every now and then, Mark would pause to take it all in. The laughter of friends, the warmth of Claire's hand in his, the knowledge that his story had not ended in pain, but had flourished into something beautiful and enduring. Mark often thought of the scars he carried, both visible and invisible. They were no longer reminders of what he had lost, but symbols of what he had gained. Resilience, love, and a purpose that made every struggle worthwhile. In the twilight of his life, as Mark watched the next generation take the reins of the programs he had started, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced battles, betrayal, and loss, but in the end, he had won the most important war of all, the one within himself. And for that, he was endlessly grateful. As the years passed, Mark and Claire became living legends in their community. Their story, shared through their book and the countless lives they touched, became a beacon of hope for people far beyond the boundaries of their small town. Veterans from across the country would visit, inspired by Mark's journey and seeking advice, or simply a kindred spirit who understood their struggles. One summer, a young woman named Sarah arrived in town. She was the daughter of one of Mark's comrades who had fallen in battle years ago. She'd read From Scars to Strength and felt a connection to Mark's story, hoping to find the closure she had been unable to grasp. Her father's death had left a void in her life, and she carried questions that only someone like Mark could answer. Mark welcomed Sarah into his home, listening intently as she shared her father's memory and the pain of growing up without him. When she finally asked what her father was like, Mark smiled gently. "Your dad," he began, "was one of the bravest men I've ever known. He talked about you all the time. You were his reason for fighting. To make the world a better place for you." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but they were tears of gratitude. Mark didn't just tell her about the man her father was. He showed her letters and photographs he had kept, pieces of her father's legacy that she had never seen before. For Sarah, it was a beginning of healing, a connection to the past that allowed her to move forward. Claire, ever the nurturer, invited Sarah to stay for a while, offering her the support and guidance of their close-knit community. Sarah, in turn, found purpose in volunteering at the center, helping others while discovering her own strength. Her presence reinvigorated Mark, reminding him of the enduring bonds between those who served and the families they left behind. As the community programs flourished, Mark and Claire began to focus on preparing the next generation to carry on their mission. Jonah, now a social worker with his own network of support initiatives, became a key figure in their efforts. He often credited Mark as his mentor. But Mark would always humbly respond, "You've become more than I ever imagined, Jonah. I'm just proud to have been part of your journey." Their annual festival of renewal continued to grow, attracting national attention. It became a place where stories of resilience were shared and celebrated, where people from all walks of life could come together and find solace in one another. Mark's role shifted from organizer to honorary guest, as younger leaders stepped up to ensure the festival's legacy endured. One evening, as Mark and Claire sat under the stars in the garden they had lovingly nurtured over the years, Claire rested her head on Mark's shoulder. "We've done well, haven't we?" she asked softly. Mark chuckled, a warm, contented sound. "Better than I ever dreamed. And it's all because we kept moving forward one step at a time." The garden around them was more than a testament to their shared labor. It was a living metaphor for their lives. Every flower, every tree, every blade of grass spoke of growth, resilience, and renewal. It was a place of peace, a sanctuary that reminded them daily of how far they'd come. In his later years, Mark continued to write, his words reaching people across the globe. His reflections were simple but profound, rooted in the idea that pain, while inevitable, could be transformed into something meaningful. "Scars are not the end of the story," he wrote in one of his final essays. "They're proof that you've survived, that you've healed, and that you're stronger than you ever thought possible." When Mark finally passed away, surrounded by Claire, Jonah, Sarah, and the many others who had become part of their extended family, the town mourned but also celebrated the life of a man who had turned his pain into a legacy of hope. Claire, though heartbroken, carried on their shared mission. She continued to nurture the community they had built together, finding strength in the love they had shared and the countless lives they had touched. The programs they started continued to thrive, guided by the seeds Mark and Claire had planted. Mark's memory lived on not just in the hearts of those who knew him, but in the enduring spirit of the town itself. The scars he had carried were no longer marks of pain, but emblems of the transformative power of resilience, love, and the belief that even in the face of betrayal and loss, a beautiful life could be rebuilt. As the years passed, Mark's legacy grew in ways that even he could not have envisioned. The programs he and Claire started became the foundation for a national movement focused on holistic healing for veterans and at-risk youth. Community centers across the country adopted their model, creating safe spaces where people could share their stories, find support, and rebuild their lives. Claire, though grieving the loss of her partner, found strength in the work they had built together. She continued to oversee the annual Festival of Renewal, which had become a national event, drawing thousands of attendees. Each year, the festival honored Mark's memory with a Scars to Strength ceremony, where individuals shared how they had overcome their struggles, inspired by Mark's life. One particular year, Jonah, now a prominent figure in social work, delivered a keynote speech at the festival. His words captured the essence of what Mark had taught him. Mark believed in the power of stories, Jonah said to the crowd. He taught me that sharing our pain doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. And through sharing, we find connection, healing, and strength. Jonah wasn't the only one carrying forward Mark's legacy. Sarah, now an accomplished therapist specializing in grief and trauma, had opened a counseling center in her father's name. She often credited her time with Mark and Claire as the turning point in her life. The center became a haven for those seeking understanding and hope, much like the community Mark and Claire had nurtured in their small town. Claire, in her quiet moments, would often sit in the garden she and Mark had cultivated, reflecting on their journey. The garden had grown into a lush, vibrant space that was now open to the public. It was renamed the Mark and Claire Thompson Garden of Renewal, a place where people could find solace and inspiration. Visitors often left messages of gratitude and hope, tucked into the crevices of the garden's stone benches or tied to the branches of its trees. One day, as Claire walked through the garden, she came across a young couple sitting on one of the benches. They were reading from Scars to Strength together, their voices soft but filled with emotion. When they noticed Claire, they stood, introducing themselves and thanking her for sharing her and Mark's story with the world. "You've changed our lives," the woman said, her eyes glistening with tears. "We were at the edge of giving up, but your book showed us that healing is possible, that love and forgiveness are worth fighting for." Claire smiled warmly, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and bittersweet longing. "Mark always believed in second chances," she said, "and in the power of a story to change lives. I'm so glad it's helped you find yours." As Claire walked away, she felt a deep sense of peace. Though Mark was gone, his spirit was everywhere, in the lives he'd touched, the programs he'd started, and the garden that now symbolized the enduring power of hope and renewal. Continue.